Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Fastlane's webinar, Passing the CAPPS 300-85 Exam. This is webinar number 3 of the CCNP Collaboration webinar series. My name is Lee Phillips, and I'm happy to introduce our presenter today, Mr. Joey DeWheel. Joey has 20 years of experience with Cisco Collaboration Applications. He has delivered standard Cisco certification training to thousands of engineers and administrators while designing and deploying custom courses for different enterprises. Joey has been the principal developer of lab environments and lab guides that have been used for thousands of collaboration courses and participated in the development of international standards. Before we get started, I would like to quickly cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees, please leave your audio on mute to prevent any audio interference. If you have any questions during today's presentation, feel free to enter those in the chat box or the Q&A windows on the right side of your screen. We will address all questions at the end of the presentation. Also, the slides and audio recording of this webinar will be emailed out to all of our attendees within a week, so please look forward to that email from Fastlane Training. And now, your presenter, Mr. Joey DeWheel.
Thanks, Lee, and good afternoon to everyone. As Lee said, this is the third webinar in our series of webinars covering the CCNP Collaboration Exams, and there will be an additional webinar for CCNA Collaboration. Okay, so what are we looking at here? We're looking at the CAPPS course and the CAPPS 300-085 exam. That's the second or third exam on your road to CCNP Collaboration. So when I say second or third, there's actually 4 exams: CIPTV1, CIPTV2, CAPPS, and CT Collab. So you would almost certainly start with CIPTV1, and the 4th test or exam that you would do would be the CT Collab exam. For your choice for numbers 2 and 3, you've got CIPTV2 and CAPPS. So in my exploration of this, I've really looked at the order CIPTV1, CIPTV2, CAPPS, making this the 3rd exam, and then CT Collab. But you could flip CIPTV2 and CAPPS around and do it in a slightly different order. Okay, so let's look at the Cisco provided training for this exam. The basic training is the course. So we have the Implementing Cisco Collaboration Applications version 1 course, or CAPPS. That will help, but it doesn't have all the answers. So I made a little note here, and I'm going to emphasize this several times. Cisco has clearly stated that exam questions are not limited to the course material. So just understanding the course doesn't mean that you're going to be able to pass the exam. We'll look at what you need to know as we move through this webinar. Cisco now has some brand new e-learning products, and there's now a CAPPS e-learning training product, and that product does have labs. So we have a CAPPS e-learning product for CAPPS, and that's a less expensive option than the course, and it's going to give you access to labs for 365 days. So we'll have a little look at this e-learning training as well in the webinar. There's also a foundation learning guide that you can purchase. You can get this in ebook format, not really very expensive. There's no labs, so that's a little bit of a disappointment, but it does have basically the same material as the student guide has for the CAPPS course. So it's really a very inexpensive way of getting a copy of the CAPPS course student guide. Okay, again, the exam questions are not limited to the course material. So to pass, you need to know what's on the exam and what material to study. You need an effective study method, and you need to allocate the time required. Okay, how much time you need is going to depend on your background and experience. Now, we can't give you the answers here, but we can help you to get organized, and we can help to increase your chance of success. So here's our agenda for the webinar. The first thing we'll talk about is the blueprint. That's the most important item. That says here are the topics that you can be tested on. And we'll look at that blueprint in detail. Study materials and how to find them. Given that I know what the blueprint looks like, where do I find study materials for the topics on the blueprint? What study methods do I have available? How am I going to study the material once I've found it? And then we'll talk a very little bit about the effort required to pass this exam. And first up is the blueprint, or what's on the exam. So the very first thing you want to understand is Learning at Cisco has detailed information on all of these exams, or at least they have information. And I'm just going to pop into the chat window a link to the page here so that you can call this up and see a bigger, I'm going to send that to everybody, so that you can see this in a larger format and you'll have it available for you. So again, here is the link, and I've gone directly to the CAPPS exam. There's a description of all of the exams, CIPTV1, CIPTV2, CT Collab. You can just replace CAPPS with the exam you're interested in. So we can see the exam number and certification. This course is 75 minutes and has between 55 and 65 questions. It's only available right now in English. This is the overview. There's an exam topics tab, there's a study material tab, and there's a practice material tab. Before you go to take the CAPPS exam, and even before you begin studying for CAPPS, you want to review this carefully, because this tells you what's going to be on the exam. Okay, finding the right material is your first priority. So what am I going to study? Well, if you look under exam topics, again, if we go here to exam topics on this link, I will find the individual topics that are going to be on the exam. Questions on the exam can be drawn from any of these topics from any source, not just from the student guide for the course, not just from the labs for the course. And a lot of people are under the mistaken impression that if you study that foundation learning guide very carefully and you know it really well, you're guaranteed to pass. That is just not true. That foundation learning guide will assist you and get you started, but it's not adequate to pass the exam. Okay, so we can see the topics for CAPPS: TMS, provisioning TNS, TMS, Cisco Jabber, configure Cisco Unity Connection, configure Cisco Unity Express using the GUI, and implement IM and presence solution. Okay, so these are the main topic areas, and you can see the percentages of questions on each topic. So for example, for Cisco Jabber, we have 18% of the exam is on that topic. We're going to go through and look at some of the details here to get a better handle on what's on the exam. And again, I've tried to be very clear about this. Questions about the source material for test questions have come up in the Cisco learning community. And here's a response from Cisco to questions about the CIPTV1 exam. All exam items are mapped 100% to our blueprints. The courses, labs, and guides are additional materials to assist candidates in studying and preparing for the exams, but are not a guarantee that they will pass the exams. And I can tell you for absolutely sure that they are not a guarantee. It is not sufficient for any of these courses that you just know that foundation learning guide. The exams will contain material that the courses and guides don't cover. okay? And that material should be mapped to the blueprint. So you really want to be careful for each of these. Now, again, this was a response by Cisco to questions about CIPTV1, but it applies to CIPTV2, it applies to CAPPS. What you need to be able to do is find the right material to study. That's your first priority. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So I've blown up here, I've given the details for the TMS and provisioning TMS topics. So what do you need to know? You need to be able to describe the operation of TMS management and its functions, conference control center, reporting, and etc. We need to know how to use TMS to set up and establish calls. And for provisioning, we need to know, how we can provision video endpoints using TMS. And that, of course, will involve VCS, right? We're going to have to integrate VCS with TMS. Okay, so the amount of questions you could get on this, if you add these two together, is 29%. So more than a quarter, almost a third. The course itself is very light on these topics, especially considering that they're going to make up more than a quarter of the exam. The CAPPS course only has 2 lessons and 1 lab on TMS and provisioning. Okay, that material takes about 2.5 hours to cover on Friday. Because you go through it on Friday, a lot of people are burned out when you're looking at covering material in a 5-day course. The thing that you remember the least is what you get at the very end of the day on Friday, which is where this comes into play. And if the course is light on this content, then so is the e-learning and so is the foundation learning guide, because these 3 things are basically different versions of the same content. So you want to make a note right now that says, hey, I need to find some extra material other than that foundation learning guide in order to figure out how TMS and provisioning TMS works. So we also have Jabber content. Jabber content comprises about 18% of the exam, and we can see some of the subtopics here. Configure Cisco Jabber on the call manager and presence server. Configure UDS. So that's a directory service for Cisco Jabber. This is not actually the modern day Jabber, what we're talking about here. We also have some questions related to Cisco Jabber video for telepresence. That product has been end of life for a while, but Cisco seems to be using it in the classes as a video endpoint for VCS. That's quite convenient to use in a remote environment. So you're going to have to understand how to configure VCS control in TMS so that you can register Cisco Jabber video for telepresence clients. Okay, so explain how presence works and its role with VCS or Expressway. There's actually really no discussion of Expressway in the CAPPS course. That is in the CIPTV2 course. Configure desktop sharing. BFCP, that's something you would enable in a SIT profile in a communications manager to enable you to share desktops when you're using Jabber. Okay, so that's something you need to know a little bit about as well. Okay, so that's Jabber content. Now, I grouped this together with the Jabber content. This is really related. Implement IAM and presence solution. So your IAM and presence solution normally involves the Cisco Jabber client. So you need to describe the function and operation of Cisco Unified IAM and presence. You need to describe the components of the solution. You need to understand the communication flows, right? Where does a Jabber client register to? Does the Jabber client use TFTP? Where does it get its TFTP server address from? What is XMPP and how does that work? all of those things you can end up with questions, with related questions on the exam. You need to know how to configure things. Configure Cisco Unified Communications Manager for integration with Cisco Unified IM and Presence. And there could be some questions on troubleshooting Cisco Unified IM and Presence. Okay, if you look at the course, and again, this should give you a feel for how well is the course doing in terms of covering the material. So if you add up implement IM and Presence and Jabber, we have 18% and another 18%. So that's 36% of the exam. More than a third is really on Jabber and Presence. The course has 6 lessons, and there are 4 labs, including an optional lab. This material takes about 10.5 hours to cover, including the optional lab, and that material is usually covered in the course on Thursday and Friday. The course does not do a bad job of covering this. It doesn't give you all of the answers, but it's reasonably good if you look at the course and the lab together, of getting you well on the way to understanding what you need to know. And again, remember the the CAPPS course that you would take, that 5-day course. The same material is in the e-learning with labs, and the student guide from the course is basically repackaged as the foundation learning guide. A quarter of the exam questions concern Cisco Unity Connection. The course has 8 lessons and 6 labs, including an optional troubleshooting lab, and this material takes about 2 days to cover, and it's run through on Monday and Tuesday, normally in the course, so good coverage of our topics. Integrate Unity Connection in the call manager, and there's both skinny and SIP integrations. You need to know how they both work. Configure Cisco Unity Connection system settings, call management, call routing. You obviously need to know about call handlers, directory handlers, restriction tables, right? How call routing works, our direct routing rules, our forwarding routing rules, all of those things. You also need to know about Unity Connection partitions and cert spaces. They work very similarly to call manager partitions and calling cert spaces. And again, we need to know about configuring users, right, including configuring video features. Now, at the moment, if you're looking at Unity Connection 10.5, you're principally looking at a video greeting. So there's not a lot of Unity Connection video features that you need to know for this exam at the current date. So that's pretty straightforward. There's also a section here on troubleshooting Cisco Unity Connection. The course has a section on this and has a lab. Okay, so that's, again, 25% of the material. Cisco Unity Express only accounts for about 10% of the questions. Okay, configure Cisco Unity Express using the GUI. So we've got integrate Cisco Unity Express and Cisco Unified Communications Manager Express. We've got Unity Express system settings, call routing options, the auto attendant. We've got to know about account policies, subscriber classes of service, subscriber templates. As with Unity Connection, right, we need to know how users work, right? How to configure users, including class of service, subscriber templates, policies. Then we need to know how to do import functions. We need to know how to import user accounts into Cisco Unity Express from Cisco Unified Communications Manager Express. Troubleshooting is also covered. The course has 5 lessons and 4 labs, including an optional troubleshooting lab, and that material takes about 1 day to cover on Wednesday. So in some sense, this is a little bit overrepresented. The 25% of the course material roughly is on Cisco Unity Express, but it only represents about 10% of the exam. When you sit down and figure out what you need to do to study, you really have to look at the percentages here. You can't spend half of your time studying Cisco Unity Express if only 10% of the questions relate to that topic. So you need to manage your time. So, study materials. What should I study? Okay, well, how do you know what to study? There are many topics on the exam. Cisco has a variety of learning products. We have 5-day classes, e-learning with labs. There's the Foundation Learning Guide. We'll talk about these 3 options in this section of the webinar. There's different versions of the products. Now, the CAPPS course is focused on the 10.5 versions of these products, but other Learning at Cisco study material references the 9.x SR&D. So you could get questions on either the 9 or 10 versions of the products in these exams, but fortunately they're pretty similar. Unity Connection, Call Manager version 9, Unity Connection, Call Manager version 10. When you look at the kinds of questions you're going to be asked, 9.x versus 10.x, it doesn't make so much difference. What I'm doing to pass these exams is I'm focusing on 10.5. There are also many different kinds of documents that you could potentially be looking at. In addition to the Cisco Learning Training products, there are SR&Ds, deployment guides, administration and maintenance guides, and more. Okay, and we'll help you get started here. We'll try and explain what some of these options are. Learning at Cisco provides some guidance. And again, if we go back to the link that I sent to you in chat a little earlier, where we have the descriptions of these courses, I've gone to the overview, and we can see under recommended training, we have the Cisco course, implementing Cisco Collaboration Applications. That's recommended. There's a link to Cisco Technology Training for Collaboration e-learning. That link is actually broken, so when you click on it, you don't get anywhere. I've sent email to Cisco informing them of this, and they have yet to fix that. So we'll wait and see if they can get that link sorted out. There's a link here to Cisco Press documents, but there isn't any specific document or book that's called out. So if you click on this link here, you will go to the Cisco Press website, but you won't be directed to any specific Cisco Press book that's relevant to this exam. So, what do we have that we can get out of this? There's the course, and there's the e-learning, and I will talk about the e-learning shortly. There's also a study materials tab that provides guidance for each exam. So you'll find one of these tabs on the CIP-TV1 exam page, CIP-TV2, CAPPS, and CT Collab. Now, it says here that this page is designed to help you quickly find what you are looking for and so on, but really there's no direction for most of these topics. So there's no direction as to what to study for TMS, or for provisioning TMS, or for Cisco Jabber. And for Cisco Unity Connection, the only thing that they're really pointing you to are a premium subscription products here for configuring, or rather troubleshooting Cisco Unity Connection and configuring and troubleshooting Cisco Unity Express. If you want to access these products, and you can see how long they are, 32 and 31 minutes, you would need to get a premium subscription to the Cisco Learning Network. And that's $11 a month. Now, that material represents only about 3 or 4% of the exam content. I went and I got a premium subscription 7-day free trial to look at some of the material that they are recommending for CIPTV1. I was not able to access this content with that 7-day free trial. I'm not sure why that is. That might work for you. If you want to get access to that 7-day free trial, you can basically just click on Buy Now, right? And it should show you a matrix of the different subscriptions and what you get. And there's an option for a 7-day free trial subscription. Now, I wouldn't actually pay for these based on my previous experience with CIPTV1, where what they were recommending was not really relevant to the exam. This may or may not be useful, but it's only 3 or 4% of the exam content. It could be that this is not even as useful as what you're going to get in the Foundation Learning Guide. However, a big caveat, I have not looked at it, so for all I know, it's spectacular. But for my study plan, this was not a part of it. So what about official Cisco training? How can you find it? How useful is it? Well, the CAPPS course, that's the best place to start, but it is expensive, right? That's the top end. You'll get the student guide, you'll have labs, you'll have an instructor who can provide value add. The Cisco CAPPS e-learning with labs product is much less expensive, and it provides a similar experience to the course. You can have access to the content, you will have access to the content, including the labs, for 365 days for a full year. And then there's the Implementing Cisco Collaboration Applications Foundation Learning Guide. That's the least expensive option, but there's no labs included with that bundle. Okay, so I'm going to keep prefacing my comments with this. Cisco has indicated that understanding the course content is not sufficient to pass the exam. It's not, okay? So the course is a great place to start, but it's not completely adequate in terms of getting all the content that you need. The course is 5 days, okay, and it includes Unity Connection, Unity Express, Unified IAM and Presence, and adding video into a collaboration deployment. And I went through, when we looked at the exam topics, I related the course to those topics. It focuses primarily on Cisco Unified Communications Manager and Cisco Unity Connection versions 10, okay? Describes voice messaging deployment scenarios, unified presence features. We'll read this all out. Again, as we went through the list of topics, I related them to the course and what you would actually find in the course for each of those topics. There's almost 20 hours of lab exercises that are provided, so a lot of hands-on. The course is great. Okay, the labs are detailed and use real hardware and software. The instructor can provide value add and mentoring. A couple of drawbacks: expensive, in most cases around $3,500. It can be hard to take 5 days off work, right? And as well, 5 days is a long time to be in a course. I typically start zoning out Wednesday afternoon and have a hard time keeping track on Thursdays and Fridays when I take a course. That could be because I'm getting old, but a lot of people tend to find 5 days of learning to be like drinking from a fire hose. The labs are only available for the duration of the course. A lot of students, in my experience, don't even finish the labs over the course of the 5 days. There's just too much material. Okay, a little note here. Make sure your instructor has taken the test. If you're interested in certification and you're taking a 5-day expensive course from an instructor who hasn't taken the test and in many cases hasn't even looked at the blueprint, I'm not sure that's the best value for your money. Okay, so many learning partners have instructors who haven't taken the test for the courses they deliver. I know that for a fact. At Fastlane here for these collaboration courses, our instructors have passed the tests, so you can be certain of that. The CAPPS e-learning with labs product, this is new. And this is how Cisco describes it. Their newly released e-learning training for the CAPPS version 1.0 class is an all-inclusive next-generation ELT solution, which will help. I stuck help in there. It, Cisco says will prepare you for the CCNP Collaboration Exam. Again, it is not sufficient. Right? It's not sufficient for passing the exam, but it will help and it will get you a long way, particularly for technologies like Unity Connection. You get the same content as in the instructor-led training. Okay, you've got the exact same student guide and you have the exact same hands-on labs. Now, there are some caveats about the labs, and I'll talk to you about those shortly. You can work with multiple devices, right? So, when you're on vacation and you've done your ski runs for the day and you're in the hot tub, you can sit there with your iPad and you can run through a lesson or two, or whatever, right? So we can run this on an iPad, any other kind of tablet. You can run them on PCs and Macs and so on. Okay, so you get the same slides and student guide as for the instructor-led training. Okay, the instructor-led training, an instructor presents the slides. The instructor may or may not provide value add for individual slides. So some instructors will do a lot of whiteboarding and intro presentations to try and help with illustration of the subject material, and other instructors will just flip through the slides. Okay, so what value add you get here, depends entirely on your instructor. For the e-learning training, the notes for the slides are read out as a voiceover for the slide. Now, I say there's no value add, but it's actually, in some ways, it's easier to run through this. You can start it running, you can listen to the voiceover, watch the slides. You can do that on an iPad. In some ways, it's easier than trying to read through the foundation learning guide. The CAPPS e-learning product provides the exact same hands-on labs. Okay, so just a difference between these two scenarios here. For instructor-led training, all of the labs use real hardware and software. Although when you're doing remote training over the web, right, you're using a soft phone in many cases or a Jabber client. Some training partners have interfaces where you can remotely control a 9900 series phone. That can be a little bit helpful, but the interfaces for remote controlling these phones are not so great, right? It's not like you've got the phone to your left and can just plug the number in. So, for instructor-led training, you've got the real virtual machines, real routers, real voice cards in the routers, and you have soft phones. You may or may not, if you're in a class, you would have optionally real hard phones, or for some remote labs, you may be able to remote control a hard phone. Okay, for e-learning training, some of the labs use real hardware and software, and some are simulated. So, for example, for Unity Express when you're configuring the router or actually using the Unity Express interface. You have a simulated environment. Now, it's better to have a real environment, but the simulated environment is good for running through and learning what all of the steps are, right, to pop in a configuration, for example, for integrating Unity Express with Cisco Unity. Sorry, for integrating products on the router, you've got a simulated interface where you can type in the commands, but they are exactly they have to be exactly right. So no using the tab, no up arrow, no shortcuts or abbreviations. You've got to type everything in longhand. Now, a big advantage here is that the labs are available for an entire year, and you can run them repeatedly. So I've been playing with these for CIPTV2 and CAPPS, and I really think that the labs for the Cisco e-learning products are almost worth the cost of the products alone. Fastlane is offering the e-learning products for right now just a little bit less than $1,000. So that gives you all of the material from the course and all of the labs for 365 days. But there are some issues with the labs. It's not as real of an experience as if you were in the course, but it's a trade-off. You have access to the labs for a year, and it's less than a third of the price. Okay, so I've just made a little note here that the e-learning labs provide advantages over IoT labs in some cases, right? The instructor-led training, the labs are only available for the 5 days that you're in class, right? And in many cases, you can't finish the labs in the time allocated, so the time to run labs in a 5-day class is limited. For the e-learning training, you have access to these labs for an entire year. You can run the labs repeatedly. For some of the labs, you can just explore the GUI, right? If you don't have, access to the product. For example, you don't have access to communications manager that that you can just use to explore when you're doing your studying. Okay, so a home lab can be expensive to build, and in many cases, companies don't deploy learning labs for you to use. And fooling around on a production system, you can only get so far with that. What about the Cisco Press book, Implementing Cisco Collaboration Applications Foundation Learning Guide? Right, that it's not a bad book, right? I mean, it's a good book. I know Chris Olson; he's a great instructor, and has done a good job with this. But it's basically a reproduction of the CAPPS student guide. If you've taken the course, you don't really need this book. This book is the cheapest way to get an equivalent to the student guide from the course. So if you can't or don't have the money to take the course, you don't want to buy the e-learning product. What you want is, a really inexpensive product that gives you as good of a head start as you could possibly get. Then this is what you would go for, the Foundation Learning Guide. Again, this does not guarantee that you will pass the exam. You can study this book until the end of time. That's not going to guarantee a pass on the exam. A downside to the Cisco Press book, there are no labs. So there's no hands-on here that comes with this Foundation Learning Guide. What about other official documents? SRNDs, administration guides, deployment guides, feature and service guides, Cisco Live presentations. We have all sorts of official documents that we can look for. And we have some unofficial material. For example, there's a lot of YouTube content out there. Now, for CAPPS, you're going to have to do some web searches, particularly for TMS. Okay, so for TMS, because there's so limited content in the course, in the e-learning product, in the Foundation Learning Guide, you're going to have to look at some administration and or deployment guides to get a better feel for how TMS works. Oh, that slide's not appropriate. Okay, so it's a typo, that slide. I provided you with a link here to a set of presentations that you can download. This is an archive of presentations for the last number of Cisco Live sessions from 2016, 15, 14, 13, 12. You can, and they're free, right? So you can basically log in here, create a username and password, log in, and then you can download these presentations. There's a lot of useful information here. Okay, so study methods, how should I study? Once you've found the material that you're going to use as a basis for studying, well, what should you do with it? There's many ways to study. So one way is to read and reread. So that works very well if you have an extremely good memory. If you don't have an extremely good memory, it's not so good. I mean, it's obviously the first thing you would do is read the material. I used to be able to remember things that I read 3 times. Now I have to read them 7 or 8 or 9 times. So read and reread will only get you so far. There's take notes and summarize. So you can read the material and then try to create some sort of summary guide. You can do practice labs, and there's the option of practice tests. Or at least this is the way you would normally study. Read and reread. I mentioned this. It may be good for a first step, but it's problematic as a complete solution. What we're doing here is we're starting to build crib notes for these various exams, and we're starting to review them in the classes that we're delivering here at Fastlane. We're not aware of any CAPPS practice labs other than the actual CAPPS or CAPPS e-learning labs. But the CAPPS e-learning option, that provides you with a good place to start. It includes all of the labs from the CAPPS course. And even if some of them are simulated, you still get the opportunity to run through all of the steps. You get access to the labs for a full year, and it's just not that expensive. So if you don't have access to a lab environment, you don't have access to the VMs in your production environment, even to have a look, you can't build a home lab, this is something that you can do that really is reasonable in terms of cost. It's not as great as having a real lab, but it's the next best thing, and it's cost effective. What about practice questions? Normally people who are studying for an exam practice by doing practice questions. And, you read about, there's the LSAT and MCAT. There's all these big exams that people take, and to study, you basically are doing endless questions, right? So Cisco provides 9 practice questions here on this tab. So there's only 9 practice questions. Getting 100% on these does not mean that you are ready to take the test. This is just to give you an idea of what the test is like. So this is really not, something for you to use to evaluate your progress. and to see, am I ready to take the exam? It's more or less an illustration of what the questions look like. There are practice questions in the instructor-led course student guide, and in the e-learning courses, and in the foundation learning guide. You should do those if you have them. You can search on the internet and find many CAPPS practice tests. None of them are approved, so that's a concern. Using them to prep would be considered cheating if the questions on the practice test are copies of the real test questions. Then also you just won't have the job skills necessary. So some of these brain dumps, if you download them, you pay for them. In some cases, you're buying questions and answers, which is basically cheating. And I've known people who weren't even aware of how this worked, who just thought, well, naturally, I'm going to pay and download a practice test. That's the natural thing to do. It might be natural if you're doing your LSAT or MCAT, but for Cisco and Microsoft and VMware certifications, these downloads in many cases are exact copies of what's on the test. Crib notes. We've started building summaries or crib notes. I didn't get time to pop one into this presentation from CAPPS. This is one from CIPT v2. And in fact, there's some real overlap in content from CIPT v2 and CAPPS. So if you were to buy the CIPT v2 Foundation Learning Guide, the material in there on VCS and registering a Jabber video for telepresence client is actually relevant to CAPPS. So what we've done is basically, said here, these are the steps, and we've placed them in a row, right? And for each step, any particular parameter or value that's really needs, that is highlighted in the step, we've called these out. And so, our study approach has been build these summaries and then try and get to the point where you can reproduce this, where you can just write this out without having to look at the paper. Now, even if you can't get to that point, if you were to produce this summary and then try and just copy it out 4 or 5 times slowly, you would really start getting to the point where you're remembering the salient information. Study effort. How much time should I spend preparing? Well, it really depends on your background. If you know TMS, Jabber, and Unity Connection well, then you have a very good start. We find a lot of people that are strong in one of these areas, like Unity Connection, but not so strong with TMS and Jabber. And as well, if you've taken the earlier CAPPS course, you would have gone through Jabber and Unity Connection. So a lot of voice or collaboration professionals have some experience with Jabber and Unity Connection, but really don't know TMS, right? So TMS, if you don't know TMS, then your first job is going to be to have a look through, Cisco Live presentations, have a look at the administration and deployment guides, try and find a good document that you can use, review the document, build some summaries, and hopefully that will get you ready, okay? In general, it's very difficult to know when am I ready. The Cisco Learning Practice Test isn't adequate, and there are no other practice tests that you can legitimately download. So you really have to sort of wing this, right? It's very possible you will not succeed at your first attempt. It's sad to say, but it's true. It's almost like you have to take the exam to figure out how ready you really are. Okay, so here's a summary. The CAPPS 300-085 exam, it's the second or third exam on the road to CCMP collaboration. We looked at the blueprint, we looked at the study materials, we looked at the study methods, and we looked at the effort required. We didn't give you any answers. I mean, we can't actually tell you questions and answers. So what we mean is we didn't give you any answers to any questions that were specifically on the exam, right? We're not guaranteeing that you're going to pass. What we've tried to do here is help you to get organized and prepare for the exam. Okay, you can check out the Fastlane website. Our CCNP collaboration courses, we're enhancing them to include exclusive exam prep content. So understanding the blueprint, right? Learn about sources for study material. We'll go into sources for study material in more detail in the actual courses. We'll talk a little bit about test preparation techniques, and we'll start you in building crib notes for blueprint content. So we'll run through that in the class as a value add. We'll look at, for example, an administrative guide or a configuration guide. We'll have a look at it. We'll see what the high-level steps are. And we'll look at building crib notes that will help you to understand understand the content and be able to pass the exams. So we have the actual full course at Fastlane. We have bridge courses which focus on particular subsets, for example, Unity Connection and IM and Presence, and we can customize courses to meet your specific training requirements. Thank you. That's all we have for the presentation. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll address those now.
Let me be the first to say thank you, Joey. Terrific presentation with some great tips and tricks on passing your CAPPS exam. Before we begin our Q&A session, I do want to remind everyone to check out our loyalty program and other current promotions, which can all be found on our website at www.fastlaneus.com. You can receive prizes and other great offers, so definitely check that out. While you're on our website, don't forget to check out our other upcoming webinars. We're constantly adding new innovative presentations, so make sure you check back regularly or subscribe to our newsletter. With that, we can get into a couple of questions. First person asks, Joey, I know you touched on this briefly, but what about building a home lab?
Building a home lab is something that you can do, but the issue with CAPPS is there are so many virtual machines that you need to work with, particularly for VCS. So for building your home lab, you need the call manager, you would need Unity Connection, you would need the TMS virtual machine, you would need a VCS virtual machine, and then there's a requirement for a router that can do Cisco Unity Express. So it's doable, but for the CAPPS course, it's a relatively expensive solution.
Okay. Our next question concerns Prime Collaboration deployment. They're wondering if that's going to be featured on the exam.
Yeah, that is a component of the course. So the course discusses Prime Collaboration provisioning, and it's got a lab for Prime Collaboration provisioning, but that's not, PCP is not on the blueprint. If it's not on the blueprint, it shouldn't be on the exam. So I would say don't worry about Prime Collaboration provisioning for the CAPPS exam.
All right, and our third and final question, do I have to schedule the labs that come with the Cisco e-learning product?
No, they're available 7 days a week, right, 24 hours a day, for the 365-day length of your subscription. They do take a little while to start because remember, you're accessing an environment with a number of virtual machines, so those need to be spun up. So you'll have to plan your time if you want to run through one of these labs. Some of them can take 2 hours to run through. You're going to need to allocate 20 minutes or so to have the lab instantiated for you, to have the machines all spun up and ready to go.
Okay, terrific. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Just as a reminder, this webinar session has been recorded and will be made available to you. You'll receive an email within the next few days with a link to the recorded session. If you're interested in Fastlane training or have any further questions, please visit the Fastlane website. Again, a huge thank you to our presenter, Joey DeWiel. We hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we'll see you back for our next webinar.
Thanks, Lee.